The Ten Commandments and its influence on American law and government. That's the topic of today's Faith and Freedom. I'm Matt Staver, founder and chairman of Liberty Counsel. Joining me is Shawn Akers, the vice president of Middle Eastern Affairs for Liberty Counsel. Shawn, we've talked about the actual litigation issues of the Ten Commandments. We've gone over the first and second Ten Commandments, and now we want to talk about the third commandment, which is the commandment about not taking God's name in vain or blasphemy. You know, some people say, well, I understand how some of the later commandments could be incorporated or have influenced American law and government, murder, other kinds of things, coveting or stealing. But how about these first ones? Well, we've already talked about the first one, thou shalt have no other gods before me, and the second one about not having any idols. The third one is the blasphemy commandment, not taking God's name in vain. Well, in 1610, in Virginia, the Virginia statute says that no man blaspheme God's holy name. Mm-hmm. That was pretty common. 1639 in Connecticut. If any person shall blaspheme the name of God the Father, Son, or Holy Ghost, and it gives the penalty. And it goes on and on. 1921, we won't read from it, but there's a long quote in this booklet that we've created called The Ten Commandments in American Law and Government from the Supreme Court of Maine. Mm-hmm. So this is not just 1600s, 1700s. It's 20th century, 21st century as well. And in fact, we have a list here. We don't have a chance to go over it, but it's a long list of all the different places where in early history this has been done throughout history. 1944, the Supreme Court of Florida, Shawn, also addressed this as well and says this court has never defined the legal meaning of the word profanity, so far as this writer has been able to discover. But a number of other courts of last resort have done so, and practically all of them, following pretty closely the dictionary meaning, define it as the words use of the words importing an imprecation of divine vengeance, of implying divine condemnation, or words denoting irreverence of God and holy things, blasphemous. These decisions, listen to this, hark back to the third commandment of the Decalogue, thou shalt not take the name of the Lord thy God in vain.
Amazing, Matt, that we've gotten so far away from this understanding. You've shown this with a very comprehensive amount of research, even in a small booklet, that everything from what you just cited was a relatively modern case. That was Florida Supreme Court 1944, but the same exact thing was true of Commander-in-Chief George Washington, who laid out prohibitions against swearing on the same basis. You've got a list here, Matt, almost all the states that anyone has crossed or lived in or has some history with. Listen to this. Massachusetts, 1641. New Hampshire, 1680. Pennsylvania, 1682. Pennsylvania again, 1700. Pennsylvania again, 1741. South Carolina, 1695. North Carolina, 1741. This is not the anomaly that modern historians would have you think. This was something that the United States took very seriously all the way up into the 1950s.
No question. And they're still on the books today. And in fact, if you go to certain public parks, different kinds of language that you're not supposed to use that are still in the ordinances comes from the blasphemy statute, the blasphemy commandment that ultimately entered into the common law and eventually was manifested into statutes. So it's not like this is old, dusty stuff that's still not used. It's still on the books. Now, we could go on and on about that because we've got a lot of material there. But we can move now to the fourth commandment. The fourth commandment is the commandment about the Sabbath. Well, how is that used? Well, there's a United States Supreme Court called McGowan versus Maryland. And the question was, are these Sunday closing laws or so-called blue laws unconstitutional because they come from the fourth commandment? The Supreme Court upheld all of these. And in every state today, there is some form of Sunday blue law or closing law on the books. In some states or counties, you can't have any retail operations. In others, you can't sell liquor until 2 o'clock. Why is that? Well, the reason why that is so that people could go to church. You don't want to sell liquor at 9 o'clock when people are going to church. You want to don't sell have other kinds of stores selling different things while people are in church. Every state in America still has these restrictions of what can be done on Sunday. and it goes completely and directly back to the Sabbath commandment.
You know, Matt, I don't want to slow us down as we go through these commandments, but one of the things that is very obvious as we do is that many of us are old enough to remember these laws having been enforced very naturally, and you have to ask yourself, if the nation was blessed while they were being enforced, what happens when a nation turns its back on them?
Well, look at KFC or the chicken place, the Chick-fil-A.
Chick-fil-A.
They ultimately closed their buildings and their operations one day a week, and they're very successful.
Yes.
They put God first in all that they do. The fifth, we could go on and on about the fourth commandment, but the fifth commandment exhorts children to honor their parents. Of course, we can go through early manifestations of this in the colonial laws. But, Shawn, I want to point out one of the cases from your home stomping grounds, Louisiana. The Louisiana Court of Appeals referred specifically to this, and it says this, quote, and this is a modern decision, honor thy father and thy mother is as much a command of the municipal law as it is part of the Decalogue, regarded as holy by every Christian people, and so forth. A child, says the code, whatever be his age, owes honor and respect to his father and mother, coming from the fifth commandment. You also have the sixth commandment. We could spend all day. Now, in this particular booklet, we didn't go through every single manifestation of this because it would take a volume in itself. That's the commandment about not killing, or as the Hebrew would say, not to murder. One quote I just want to read, and then maybe we can move on to another commandment here. As recently as 1998, a Wisconsin Court of Appeals quoted a 1974 Indiana Supreme Court decision that says, quote, virtually all criminal laws are in one way or another the progeny of Judeo-Christian ethics. We have no intention to overrule the Ten Commandments. So when people say that they have nothing to do with American law and government, they simply have no clue what they're talking about.
No, not only do they lack a historical understanding, but they lack a substantive understanding, Matt. I mean, what you're seeing here is that the literal substance, not just the form of our laws, flow directly from ideas that came from these commandments. You're right. We could spend all day on the sixth in a variety of issues, all the way from abortion forward. But I think the quote from 1998 here, at least one court was willing to say that they're not going to overturn the Ten Commandments.
And there's many courts that have actually had similar statements to that, especially on that commandment. The seventh commandment is the commandment about not committing adultery. Of course, that was enacted in the early colonial times, but it's not just for the colonial period. It's also in modern day. The Texas Court of Appeals in a recent decision refers to the adultery statute. The Washington Supreme Court in a recent decision says, quote, adultery, whether promiscuous or not, violates one of the Ten Commandments and the statutes of this state, close quote. This is not ancient history. This is also modern court decisions as well that refer to this. And in fact, all of our laws, like the alienation of affection laws, some of these statutes are being removed, where someone could file a civil action against another third party for interfering with the marital relationship. All of those laws, divorce laws, those originally were based and founded upon the commandment about not committing adultery.
And what's fascinating about them, Matt, is that you see, despite the characterizations of the ACLU and other groups, you see here when you read through this that there are very, very legitimate reasons to have this. You're talking about the protection of the nuclear family with the seventh commandment, that's from which all the blessings of the nuclear family have flown, just because the seventh commandment itself told us this is really the way that things should operate.
Yeah, and we can go on and on about that. Alexis de Tocqueville found that the reason why America, one of the reasons, was much better than Europe is because there was stability and there were peace in the marital relationships in the homes. That wasn't consistent like that over in Europe, but it was different here. And when you have a disordered situation at home, you're going to have a disordered situation in the political realm as well. Give us a call at Liberty Counsel at 1-800-671-1776, and you can order this book called The 10 Commandments in American Law and Government. We can send that to you right away. You can also go to the website at lc.org and order it. But it's a fascinating read, and it doesn't take a long time to go through it, but it's fascinating, and it'll whet your appetite for much more. And for additional information about the founding, you can ask for David Barton's book, Original Intent. Also, you can get that at lc.org or call us at 1-800-671-1776. Remember, Liberty Counsel in your prayers, as well as your regular financial support. Go to Liberty Counsel's website for more information, lc.org, or call us today toll-free.